Good franchise, bad game. I think everyone's been there. You're excited for the latest video game in whatever franchise, one that's been known to deliver. Let's say you're a huge Donkey Kong fan. The Kong can do no wrong. You pop in Donkey Kong Barrel Blast expecting greatness to be left with disappointment and mad carpal tunnel. Video games that become major franchises usually happen by pure mistake. It's usually directly attributed to the reception and success of the first game. You can't even plan for it. Anyone remember Advent Rising? Majesco really wanted to make that the next big thing in games, even offering $1 million contest that was swiftly ruined by hackers and probably a lack of, sales. I don't think they were really trying to make Final Fantasy a franchise, considering it was Square's last resort back in the 80s, but here we are in 2022 and I'm stuck with memories I don't want to have. I've unfortunately had this experience a lot. I think a good example of this is something like Devil May Cry 2. At the time of release, DMC was a brand new series, so it was one-to-one with quality, but over time it's become more and more obvious that, yeah, DMC 2 just ain't cutting it. But hey, they can't all be zingers, unless you're the Mario franchise, because I've tried long and hard to find something actually bad that was made by them, and I couldn't. Good job, Nintendo. So what are we looking for? Well, I'm gonna say at least 3 games sharing the same name. I don't think 2 games makes a proper franchise, otherwise this video would just be a hit piece on Alundra 2. One day, I swear. I'm also not gonna talk about stuff I've already talked about before, so basically what I'm saying is yes, Dragon Age 2 belongs, but I can't, not again.
So yo, it's Austin, and today we're gonna be taking a look at, well, bad games, I guess, but ones that come from disappointment. A good company can have a good franchise and make a subpar game here and there, but it's the really bad ones that leave a lasting mark. There's a lot of examples of things to talk about, but first I need to talk to y'all about today's sponsor. Who is it?
Hello.
By God, it's Raid Shadow Legends!
It is me, Raid Shadow Legends. Are you ready to game?
Oh yeah! Raid Shadow Legends is here, and gamers everywhere rejoice. Raid is the first game to bring that true console-level experience straight to your phone. With millions of champion combinations, you'll be able to become a master tactician, taking on raid bosses, dungeons, campaign battles, and diving into a little PvP. If you're a fan of RPG combat, this one's for you. We've been playing Raid quite a bit over here, and I've gotten intimate with several of the over 600 champions. I like Rotos with his big ol' nuking damage, and Coronar, who's literally a giant beastman tank that can take a lot of punishment. But they got nothing on Venus, a legendary support champion who's all about support. Behind every great team, there's the mightiest of debuffers. Oh, and Poison, you gotta love Poison. So Raid just celebrated its 3-year anniversary, nearly 3 years after I talked about it the first time, and there's no signs of slowing down. Coming now is the Daliana Chase event, where you can get Daliana, a brand new champion, and all you gotta do is play Raid for 7 days between now and July 20th. Oh, and in case you were wondering, now is the best time to get started in Raid Shadow Legends, so click the link down in the description or scan the little QR code on the screen to get yourself a free starter pack that's worth about $40. That's 3 free champions, Misericord, Tiger Soul, Romero, and 10 Magic XP, Force XP, and Spirit Brews. Also, make sure to use promo code MyDailyana in-game to get another in-game gift of 50 XP brews and a bunch of silver. The gifts keep coming. Check out Raid Shadow Legends today, and hey, thanks for the sponsor, Mr. Raid.
No problem, I must depart. Goodbye.
For now, let's go back to the video and get started with undoubtedly the most popular video game character of all time, Super Mario. Yeah, sorry, I lied.
But it's not what you think. At this point, there might actually be countless Mario video games. Between full mainline titles, games in a universe as a whole, crossovers and cameos, there's easily over 128 Marios to be found. It's a rare day, however, when Nintendo would license their character out for someone else to work with. The most famous cases of this are the Zelda CDI games and Hotel Mario. I intentionally didn't want to talk about these at length though, because what fun is beating a dead horse? Or Dodongo?
How about a kiss for luck?
You've got to be kidding.
These games weren't the first time this happened, though. I mean, Mario Bros. Appeared on the Atari consoles before the NES was even around. I specifically want to talk about Hudson Soft. Yeah, Bomberman and Adventure Island Hudson. Back in 1986, a year after the original Super Mario Bros. And prior to Lost Levels coming out, Hudson would get their hands on the plumber. Super Mario Bros. Special for the PC-88, Sharp X1, and Samsung SPC 1500 in Japan and South Korea only. This tiny floppy disk would be the first port of the hottest selling video game on the planet, and it wouldn't be handled by Nintendo. And considering where PCs were for gaming back then, this was a mistake. Now there's a lot of differences between the 3 ports of Special, but I played the PC-88 one because emulation is not easy. Welcome to Flicker City. Yeah, imagine you're trying to speedrun 1-1. It's like, oh yeah, here we go. How about enemies suddenly spawning on the next screen and killing you? It's more likely than you'd think. Playing this makes you realize how ahead of the game the Nintendo Entertainment System was. Granted, PCs weren't really made with gaming in mind back then, but smooth scrolling would take a second to become mainstream. On top of that, the game's performance speed changes drastically depending on how many dudes are on the screen. I mean, honestly, it just kind of feels random. Mario moves seemingly frame by frame or faster than usual, and you have no control over that. You also need to be way more precise with your jumping because the hitboxes are all out of whack. Yeah, it's kind of the worst port of a classic you can imagine. I'll take the vertical scrolling of Super Mario DX over this any day. But it does have the word special in the title, which means they must have added something, even if the main screen looks like it says Super Special Mario Bros. There's a few new power-ups and enemy types from other Mario adjacent games from the time, like Donkey Kong. There's crabs, flies, barrels, wing power-ups, and even the Hudson Bee makes an appearance. I love the wing because it allows Mario to fly for like 2.5 screens all while he's doing his little swim animation. It looks really good. At least when you beat it, Princess Peach calls you the greatest player. Congratulations. There's no redeeming qualities here, except maybe the box art. It looks nice. You know, I'm surprised Nintendo even let Philips have a crack at it after this one. Try this one out if you want to appreciate life just a little bit more. Or if you're one of those guys that thinks Odyssey's bad.
You see, that's what I'm talking about. This is the kind of quality I look for. Utter chaos. But that's not to say that poorly designed disappointments aren't gonna make the cut. And while we're talking about Nintendo, we might as well move on to the franchise with the most hot takes I've ever seen, Pokemon.
There's not many video game franchises out there bigger than Pokemon. That being said, there's also not many video game franchises out there where the fan base can't seem to decide on a worst entry. I feel like every time a new generation of these things comes out, it's the worst one yet. It's like the Sonic cycle all over again. When was the last time the Pokemon fandom was satisfied with their newest game? Meanwhile, there's me, thinking about all my favorite franchises, just in the grave by Konami. Suikoden's and Rocket Knights aside, the Pokemon Company is easily one of Nintendo's largest studios, and they're putting out all kinds of stuff every year. Games, plushies, anime, a very popular trading card game ruined by hypebeasts, and of course, smiles for kids around the globe. I've been known to play and enjoy a Pokemon here and there. I'll talk about Conquest all day, and recently I had a lot of fun with Shield, even though it's extremely easy. That's kind of just where the franchise is these days, cute RPGs for beginners. That being said, if we were to look at the entire franchise, spin-offs and all, what's a game in it that you could really consider bad, like actually bad? Well, removing free-to-play mobile games and whatever the heck my Pokemon Ranch was brings me to one game, Pokemon Battle Revolution for the Wii. What a disappointment. This is what happens when you're trying to sell a gimmick and not a real video game. The big thing with Battle Revolution was pushing the connectivity of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl on the DS with a Wii game. Similarly to how Pokemon Stadium and Coliseum had devices that you could hook a Game Boy Advance or a Game Boy cartridge up to, they were trying to do the same thing. They even got the same developer, Genius Sonority, to work on it. Both Coliseum and XD Gale of Darkness were cool games that brought the concept of Pokemon into a single-player RPG world. With these two games and the Nintendo 64 Stadium ones, you had plenty of content to mess around with. There were story modes, all kinds of different challenges, and weird, silly mini games, or just playing the actual Game Boy version on the TV. The Clefairy song has yet to leave my mind over 20 years later. There's not like an inherent issue with trying to sell a gimmick as a video game. The problem is when you brazenly lock people out of content. There are a lot of things that you cannot see in Battle Revolution unless you have the DS game connection with a copy of Diamond or Pearl. You want to make a custom character with custom Pokemon and, you know, unique gear? You gotta connect. Playing BR without this gives you access to rental passes. Yeah, the word rental in a game that you may have bought. These passes are characters and Pokemon configurations that you can do the challenges with. I know this is sounding pretty much like just the Stadium mode from Stadium on the Nintendo 64, and well, that's actually all there is to this game. Yeah, that's it. It's battles. There's no single player story. There's no real progression. Imagine Stadium, but with like a third of the content, even less if you don't have a DS hooked up, and there you go. Battle Revolution is like a tech demo for 3D Pokemon fighting, but sold as a full game for full price. That's not to say what they have here is isn't quality, Genius Sonority did a good job with a lot of the animations. A lot of the 3rd and 4th gen Pokemon have a lot of character and do fun things. I mean, this game is kind of why I love Honchkrow. Look at him die.
Down as well.
But it's not even, because then you have Ponyta who's like doing whatever this is. Some of the music is pretty solid too. When it comes to the base Pokemon fighting stuff, they did a good job. It's just, that's all they did. As the follow-up to 2 very good single-player console Pokemon games, this isn't just disappointing, this isn't good. On top of that, in order to get the full experience out of it, you needed a Wii, a Nintendo DS, a copy of Battle Revolution, and a copy of Diamond or Pearl. So you're looking at several hundreds of dollars, even now, when you can get most of that dirt cheap. Sure, it was the first Pokemon game to have online play, but that's not even around anymore, so at this point, you're left with a glorified animation simulator. And honestly, considering each Pokemon only has 4 moves, you're just watching the same thing over and over. There's clearly some love here, but the business decisions surrounding this, a game that was the first major Pokemon game on a new shiny console, are real disappointing. Also, you thought I was gonna say the Gen 4 remakes from the thumbnail, didn't you? Got 'em.
See, I was always more of a Digimon guy, so I didn't play this when it came out, but instead I just had to deal with like half of my entire franchise sucking. Anyways, let's talk about one more RPG franchise, and it's not gonna be Star Ocean, otherwise we would be here for 5 hours as I talk about till the end of time. But instead I wanna go a little further back to a lesser known franchise called Phantasy Star, one that starts with a PH. Cause it's cool.
I think it's blatantly obvious that I love Phantasy Star. 2 and 4 were my first JRPGs actually, as the Sega Genesis was the first console that was like mine. I wouldn't get my hands on a Super Nintendo or its classics until way later, or emulation, so to me, JRPGs were a rarity. I used to think that Fire Emblem was a Shining Force ripoff. I didn't know, how could I? The sci-fi world of Phantasy Star was, and still is, captivating. It did this neat thing where it combined a fantasy setting with the prospect of space travel. You'd be in the middle of an adventure on one planet when it's like, hey, we gotta go across the galaxy. And you do, multiple times. That sense of exploration made these small 16-bit cartridges feel like unmissable journeys. They used comic-style panels with larger-than-life sprites to show you the characters and the world and make big moments really stand out. In battles, you'd see your characters' backsides and watch them do animations when they attacked. It felt huge. It also probably explains why I have a thing for girls with massive shoulder pads. The 90s. While this series has completely changed the direction with Phantasy Star Online, Universe, and Online 2, those original 4 games are something that have stuck in my brain, but one of them for the wrong reason. This might catch a little bit of heat, but one of the original 4 Phantasy Star games has never felt good to me. I love 2, I love 4, heck, I'm even a big fan of the original Sega Master System 1. But Phantasy Star 3 Generations of Doom was a huge disappointment for me. Yeah, even as a kid, little 6-year-old barely knows how to brush his teeth me couldn't get into Phantasy Star 3, and it took me a while to understand why. I mean, all things considered, this game has one of the coolest concepts going for it. The subtitle Generations of Doom comes from, well, Phantasy Star 3's unique system of generations. Taking place a ridiculous amount of time in the future from most of the series, you play through 3 different generations of characters with a plot that gets molded by your choices. At 2 different points in the game, you're given the choice of marrying 1 or 2 characters, which will lead to the creation of a new protagonist. Similarly to Master Chief losing his virginity, this has a major impact on the rest of the game as it'll influence the story and everything else that's going on. It's more of a route ABC kind of deal, but it's interesting to see the marriage flowcharts. Any romance or character interactions or like a personality? No, make baby. Phantasy Star 3's fatal flaw is that it's just way too ambitious for its britches. By trying to do this complicated thing with the story, it fails in a lot of the aspects that made the first 2 games great. And it all kind of starts with the box art. We got like a dude on a stone staircase going through space, fighting a barbarian looking guy shooting lasers out of his chest. It's bizarre, but somehow better than the Japanese cover, which is, yeah, I don't even know. This whole series was cursed with ridiculous box art in most regions, yet somehow the Phantasy Star 4 cover pulled me in. We'll get deep into that another time, but Generations of Doom. I think it's easy to try and give this one a pass considering it was released in 1990, over a year before Final Fantasy IV, a landmark in video game storytelling. However, if you compare this directly to Phantasy Star 2, I feel like it drops the ball in the character and story department tenfold. Because they were trying to have this choose-your-own-adventure narrative cover different generations, there's a much higher count of characters in your party, all of which get less screen time and development. The game follows this old formula of cryptic JRPG progression where you'll be real confused without a walkthrough, which I guess for the time was acceptable. Phantasy Star 3's combination of sci-fi and fantasy doesn't blend as well as other games in the series, and the visuals just don't cut it for me. I always felt like the second game in this series had a very clean but simplistic style. This time around, you don't get to see your characters in battle and are instead met with like a cloud skybox and enemies doing a tiny animation that you can barely notice when they attack. The music's also questionable. Some of the tracks have good composition and there's some nice touches. The world map theme gets grander the more party members you have, and I liked it. You can usually judge a good JRPG by its battle theme, and Phantasy Star 3 has a few of them, though they're also accompanied by the sound of someone clicking a pen as fast as they can. And don't forget about the pre-battle theme. Yo, if you dig that, I found this 10-hour version on YouTube for relaxation and meditation. When Phantasy Star 3 came out, it was given a lot of praise and had like 8s and 9s. Granted, games were reviewed differently back in, 1990, where the only thing that mattered was,
whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
It's just that when you compare it to the rest of the series, even if just the first 4, that it's very obviously the black sheep. Town design is awful and filled with copy-paste buildings, and more of half of those are completely empty. Some of the old design choices are baffling, such as the ridiculous amount of enemies having the ability to poison you, something that staying at an end won't even remove. I'm all for some old JRPGs like your Dragon Quests and whatnot, and I'll play the first 2 Phantasy Stars any day, but 3 leaves a lot to be desired. I think it's a big blemish on the Phantasy Star name, which to many probably doesn't matter, but as the resident Sega kid who's stuck in the year 2000, it means a lot.
Let's go ahead and slide tackle our way into something a little different. I'm sure that all of you know what a fighting game is, and I'm pretty sure that most of you know what Tekken is.
I'm not the biggest fighting game dude, but I do enjoy playing them. I'm currently on year 3 of denying Wooly his salty run back at Ultimax, as that's the only anime fighter I'm decent at, but anyways, I like me some fighting games. I never had a PlayStation growing up until later in life, so I didn't get to touch any Tekkens until Tag Tournament, but that was honestly all I needed. Granted, Soul Calibur would be my 3D fighter of choice until something finally clicked and Tekken 7 consumed hundreds of hours of my life. So yeah, Tekken freaking rules. I'm an Elisa Boskanovich kind of guy. Who could forget the iconic line,
"Is your refrigerator, I promise to do my best."
But it's not all roses and tossing family members off of cliffs over here. Granted, there's balance issues and the whole topic of a game aging in terms of the first one, but generally each Tekken has been an improvement from the previous game. Looking at you, Street Fighter V.
It's when you move into spin-off territory that it's death by degrees. It's always been death by degrees, or sorry, Tekken's Nina Williams and Death by Degrees. What a nightmare.
Spin-offs are a great idea, but not every idea is a good one. Death by Degrees was and still is the first Tekken-related spin-off that focuses on a single character. There's a card game and a GBA port here and there, but this was like, you can tell Namco went all out on this considering how good this game looks on the PS2. Tekken stories have always been a little nonsensical, so this was Namco's attempt to put a little more effort onto that and show us the world of Nina Williams, the assassin. And what better way to do that than by opening with a bikini-clad tutorial? Yeah, you know how it is, being a gamer in public. It's rough. The end result is a game that's a little bit Metal Gear, a little bit Resident Evil, and a little bit button mashy. Rather than give us your standard fighting game combos, things are done in a really strange way where you attack in a direction via tapping a control stick. There's combos that you can do depending on how hard you press the stick and if you're holding onto a certain button. In theory, this is simplistic, but I ended up having difficulty balancing the sensitivity of my swiping while also aiming in the right direction. So, you know, just defaulting to mashing. Or gun done. You get to explore different locations a la Shadow Moses and Metal Gear by finding objects and solving puzzles to get further and further, all while leveling up in combat. You do have the option to be stealthy, but most of the time that's not going to play out. Each of the boss fights presents itself like a Metal Gear fight too. For instance, you're exploring a trail of blood and it's all dramatic, and you end up in this meat locker, and then some dude named Bryce starts shooting at you and taunting you. Bryce kinda rules though. Death by Degrees is crazy ambitious and ahead of its time in a lot of ways, but is also extremely held back by, well, itself. The biggest issues with it are the camera and general controls. Straight up, it just doesn't feel good to play. You end up punching and kicking through waves of dudes while fighting weird semi-tank controls in the puzzle segments. Like, it can't decide if it wants to be a survival horror style puzzle game or a beat 'em up, but then it'll throw all kinds of weird mini games and keycard ass puzzles at you that require you to search in every nook and cranny. The only way to run is to hold R2, which, depending on where you are, will shift the camera directly behind you. You also can't attack in this mode, so if you're running by guys, you'll have to let go of the button, have the camera shift back to its predetermined destination, and then figure out which direction to push the stick in. It's very jarring. I think Death by Degrees might also be the first time X-ray style attacks were in a video game. Whenever you fill up the special meter, you can attack a dude by aiming at certain body parts to make their bones shatter and heart stop. This predates Mortal Kombat doing it by 6 years, by the way. Unfortunately, the story is kinda just whatever too, so what we're left with is an extremely mid game that is a massive black sheep in an otherwise top tier franchise. I don't think anyone really cared about Death by Degrees when it was coming out the same month as Tekken 5, 3 weeks later. Speaking of, this game actually came with a demo disc for Tekken 5, one that gives you a 1-bout round as Raven versus Asuka before booting you back to the main menu, and that's it. That's gotta be the lamest demo disc out there. Imagine spending $50 on Death by Degrees for a demo disc that has a minute and 30 seconds worth of content. So sit down, shut up, and enjoy a 20-second load time for an 8-second cutscene for another 20-second load time. You dummy.
All right, this one's from my boy Joshy. One of the most disappointing sequels to a video game for a franchise that, for the most part, was considered good was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, and that's easily one of the most disappointing games I've ever played.
This one hurt. Growing up, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was a mainstay of me as, a person, probably. Did I befriend this one guy just to play THPS2 on his Dreamcast? I sure did. Sorry, Brian. But ever since the apex of the series with Thug, things just kind of slowly became lesser and lesser until we started having big plastic peripherals that barely functioned, taking up space in the closet. So, not counting Ride and Shred, because why would I? The announcement of a proper Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was more than enough to get any old school fan excited. Maybe not as much as an Eric Sparrow punching simulator, but still. Oh god. No swears. Unfortunately, developed by Robomoto, the guys who did Shred and Ride, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was and is one of the most disappointing video games in existence, probably. So never minding that the entire online mode, which was built heavily into the game, just not working anymore, 5 has a plethora of problems all stemming from the core gameplay. Simply put, it feels awful. You can't even play the game by yourself without completely disconnecting from the internet. Despite wanting to be a return to form, the physics are completely off, with vertical momentum being bonkers. You have a big float on your upwards trajectory, but then coming down, smashing like a meteor into Final Fantasy VII. On top of that, you can slam, which you do have to do in order to break falls. Or, just glitch your way to safety, since there's a 10% chance you're actually gonna bail. Look, I could go on forever, and footage of this game always looks 100 times better than playing it, but please don't do that. So not only do we have broken physics, but the whole thing is just devoid of life and personality. There's no NPCs, there's no one talking to you, the levels don't have that same sense of memorability like in previous games. I don't know how you go and make a level literally called Asteroid Belt generic and lifeless, but they did it. On the flip side, the Create a Park mode is actually pretty decent, but the official levels feel like they might as well be those Create a levels, so that's unfortunate. Skateboarding was such a huge staple of American culture in the 90s and 2000s, and a whole generation was basically raised on ska and ollies during that time. So it's baffling to see a game so lifeless share the same name as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. But hey, that's Activision, a company who, among way worse things, somehow got Vicarious Visions to develop the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake that was practically a 10 out of 10 and then shoved them into Blizzard. So yeah, GG. But hey, if you've ever wanted to skate as Octodad with boobs, here you go. This is what happens when you're about to lose the license and you don't care about quality.
That was like the 007 Legends of Tony Hawk games, which I have sitting on my shelf. and I should play it, but I'm scared of it. All right, I got one more section for the video, and it's one y'all probably expected to see. There's a few publishers out there that have a really good track record, but will occasionally release a stinker here and there, but there's none as divisive as Capcom.
Oh man, Capcom. I don't think a generation of gaming's gone by without some Capcom bangers coming out, especially as a Dreamcast fan. Thanks for Power Stone, y'all. But sometime starting in the PS2 era, and especially the 7th gen of video game consoles, well, they became a little more notorious. I'm sure if you've been on the internet, you've heard the phrase crapcom, usually associated with the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3. Yep, still sad. What games do you think of when you hear Capcom? I'm sure most of y'all think Street Fighter, Devil May Cry, or Monster Hunter, but I for sure think of Resident Evil. Unfortunately, Resident Evil has had more than its fair share of stinkers, what with Operation Raccoon City and Survivor.
But I'm gonna talk about Umbrella Corps for a second, because I sat in line to play it at PAX. Yeah, I even have the badge of proof, the badge of shame.
Why? Who thought this was a good idea? Well, apparently all of Capcom. Wanting to create something that fit the esports market, yeah, you heard me, esports, they decided to create this 3v3 objective-based shooter, call it Umbrella Corps, toss a few zombies into it, loosely tied into Resident Evil, and call it a day. In a game that's ridiculously bizarre as is, the most bizarre thing is the fact that they thought anyone wanted this. Resident Evil turned into a premier co-op shooter in the late 2000s with 5 and 6, and while I love 5 to death, everything else didn't quite get to that level. Mercenaries mode this is not, as Umbrella Corps feels more like a generic shooter than anything else. But hey, at least the melee weapons feel great. More funny than anything. There's not even much to say about Umbrella Corps because, well, there's no one to play with, and you can't even get into a game unless you have a bare minimum of 4 people. Thankfully, I had a few friends to play with, so I got to experience this garbage firsthand. To be fair, this might be the best the Resident Evil 1 mansion looked, I think. Probably not.
The real reason I wanted to talk about Capcom is to talk about the final entry in a franchise that I was a big fan of, but I don't think many people know about. Now, I'm a big Lost Planet fan, but not so much Lost Planet 3.
I bet you totally forgot Lost Planet 3 existed. Don't worry, I think everyone did. Capcom's Lost Planet was a very briefly, mildly popular series in the days of the Xbox 360, and it was about as Austin Core as you can get. It was Japanese mecha with Western shooting, over-the-top storytelling, and a totally unique setting. Then the sequel, a game that was really mixed reviews at the time, but had one of the most fun co-op experiences I've ever played. You got into robots with your friends and fought massive bugs while some of them blew them up from the inside. What's not to like? Sure, it's a bit campy, it's not perfect, but to me, Lost Planet Extreme Conditions and 2 were awesome. There was also the Japanese-only EX Troopers for the PS3 and 3DS that exists and is somehow related to Lost Planet, but this is about Lost Planet 3. In the mid-2010s, Capcom started outsourcing a lot of their games. Devil May Cry, Dead Rising, and Strider were all given to Western devs in an attempt to capture the Western market. Most of these didn't do so hot, as much as I dug Double Helix's take on Strider. Lost Planet 3 was given to Spark Unlimited, who didn't have a good track record. I'm sure there's 3 of you out there who've heard of Turning Point Fall of Liberty, but what you really need to know is that the last game they made before shutting down was Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. And that game sucks. Lost Planet 3 is better than that, just barely. So Lost Planet 3 is what happens if you take out the over-the-top nature and co-op out of the experience and still call it Lost Planet. This attempt at an icy planet with giant alien bugs decided to go the grimdark route. You play as Jim Payton, a guy that looks halfway between Nicolas Cage and Jake Gyllenhaal. It starts in the future as he's dying, talking to his granddaughter before going back in time. So you already know the endpoint here, but that's okay. We're then taken to the past, touch down on an ice planet to join an expedition for resources. You know the deal, it's the MacGuffin for solving the Earth's energy crisis by colonizing another planet. But instead of giving us a ton of aliens to fight with friends and over-the-top mech sequences with unforgettable combat, we get a generic third-person shooter. Seriously, you put any of the boss fights in this game up against Lost Planet 2's and it's not even close. Those 2 games had moments of conquering larger-than-life beasts that resembled Monster Hunter more than a shooter, and that just doesn't exist here, especially because you're running solo. There's like a few decent moments in the robots, which are now first person, but they resemble like Impact from Koemon more than the fast-moving mechs from the first two games. It's not that the shooting feels objectively bad or anything, it just feels uninspired and like they decided to focus on other things, namely the graphics and the environment. To be fair, the atmosphere they created here is thematically close to something like John Carpenter's The Thing, which is one of my favorite films. It just doesn't work well when it's a 10-hour-long video game that looks a dark shade of blue or gray for 90% of the runtime. I feel the ambition, I'm breathing it in, but this isn't Lost Planet. It's like Spark Unlimited saw robots, ice, and aliens, decided that everything else is dumb, and to make it your run-of-the-mill mid-2010s shooter, and that was that. I wrote in my notes that it lacks the yeehaw fun of the previous entries, and whatever that means, but it just feels right. Weirdly, a lot of the people who worked on this went on to make the 2018 God of War reboot, which is considered to be excellent, so I don't know if this was a victim of the time, Capcom's pressure, a flawed concept, or whatever, but unfortunately, it was the end of the franchise. Lost Planet 3 is a victim of the westernization era of Capcom, and if they ever decide to res it, they can still outsource it to like D3 Publisher because it's only a few steps away from Earth Defense Force anyways. Maybe it'll come back one day, who knows. I sure would love to see another. But at least bring Lost Planet 2 back to Steam. I need to play co-op again, I miss it.
And well, that's all for today. I actually had a couple more games that I wanted to talk about, but I literally kept writing and writing, so I had to scrap a couple. I didn't realize how much I disliked Phantasy Star 3, but here we are. Probably could have made an entire video just covering Capcom games because, well, the mid-2010s were not kind to them. Write any suggestions down below in the comments, just don't say Suikoden 4, otherwise I will get sad. Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when I actually talk about clones. I had to shift some stuff around. Life's weird. Sorry.
Thank you all so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, P Funk, Randall Bentley, Ryan Talbert, and Shazan. Thank you all so much for your generous support. So heads up for everyone, I'm going to be announcing a charity stream sometime in the next week on my next video. I'll have more details there as to where and when it's going to be, but stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch y'all next week.